Happy Sunday, everyone. This is Zeitgeist, the show where we talk about all the latest TV and movies while we listen to the latest music. I'm Jordan Conrad. Today's episode is with my co-host, Niv Elbaz, and we're going to be chatting about Zendaya and specifically Euphoria and the drama. Both will be streaming on HBO Max soon. The drama is currently on video on demand, and Euphoria is an HBO original. Enjoy our conversation. Okay, so first half of this, we are going to be talking about Zendaya's performance here in the show Euphoria. So Euphoria obviously follows a group of high school students as they navigate love and friendships in a world of drugs, sex, trauma, and social media. Other famous celebrities of note that have come out of this show is Jacob Elordi as Nate Jacobs and Sydney Sweeney as Cassie. They both have a B plot that is mostly separate from Zendaya's core plot within the realm of Euphoria as a whole. One of the most notable things about Zendaya in this show is that she acts very much as a proxy for the main showrunner, Sam Levinson. Now, you can't really talk about Euphoria without talking about Sam Levinson. He was and is the son of the famous director, Barry Levinson, who created Rain Man and a ton of other things. The interesting thing about this character on the show is that she more or less acts as the showrunner's voice. Sam Levinson has struggled with addiction in the past. He's clean now. And Zendaya plays a character who is very much a struggling addict and continues through this 3-season arc to struggle and struggle and struggle. So, in order for us to talk about this, we will have to dive into some spoilers regarding that struggle. I think that that's fair game. And similarly, in the second half, the drama almost entirely relies on a major twist. So we are going to be talking about spoilers there too. So that gives Niv and I both permission to chat about this show with full conscience, knowing that you guys have either watched these programs or are aware of the spoilers that have happened. A lot of these spoilers have already come out on social media. I know for me, it was kind of hard for me to dodge. Niv, have you kept up on Euphoria as you were watching week to week? Yeah?
Yeah, of course. We would be remiss to say that because this show has spawned so many famous actors, not just Sydney Sweeney, Zendaya, and Jacob Elordi, but also Coleman Domingo, who's also everywhere
For sure.
now. And to a lesser degree...
Yeah, Coleman Domingo was largely part of the Sam Levinson crew.
Yeah.
So he and Sam Levinson worked together, I believe, on Levinson's debut feature, the name of which has escaped me. I've not seen it. Assassination Nation, I believe is the name. And that was his kind of first big break. Now, obviously, the biggest stuff that Domingo has done most recently would be him playing the father in the new Michael Jackson movie, a performance that I think can easily take him to Oscar status.
But also he's been in Sing Sing. He's done so many other things. We covered him in 4 seasons not too long ago. 2nd season is now out. And I was just going to say, like, Hunter Schafer, to a lesser degree, has also exploded from that show. But I think it's really interesting because Euphoria, even though it very much is like a Sam Levinson project, and he even has said that, Rue's character, the main character played by Zendaya, is inspired by his teenage years and his own abuse over drugs and his drug use. It is interesting that Euphoria is actually a show that already exists, that this is just another iteration, or specifically an adaptation of an Israeli show called Euphoria. Of course, it's very different, the American version and the Israeli version, but the Israeli version also talked about a bunch of young teenagers also navigating through sort of high school. And most importantly, the main character was also a drug addict in the Israeli version.
Is this the only thing that Sam Levinson has been the creator on that is not and I'm talking specifically about his direction, where it's not an original project, because I think of the main ones to hit: Assassination Nation, which was his original work, Malcolm and Marie, which is his original work, and starred Zendaya. There's Euphoria, which came before Malcolm and Marie, season 1 did, and the second season came after Malcolm and Marie and began what I think is a tumultuous relationship with Levinson and his fans, which I think is important to say because Zendaya has treated Euphoria very different this season than she did in the time of season 2. And then, of course, there's The Idol, which was an original project, which was not necessarily created by Sam Levinson, but was executed ultimately by him. The only thing of note that was an adaptation was his writing credit on Deepwater. That's a show that you and I actually covered a number of years ago, and we weren't a big fan of.
But I feel like there's a lot of things like Sam Levinson, and I explained this to one of my friends recently because she was very frustrated with the new season of Euphoria. And she was kind of like asking me, like, how could they not think about these like plot holes or these issues when realistically there is like a writer's room? And I told her, but there wasn't really a writer's room for this. Like, this is a one-man show. Sam Levinson has directed it, has written it, has pretty much done everything under his control, under his vision. And sometimes that can be like a really powerful thing, but other times it can lead to like a very hyper-focused vision that does not do well with the scrutinization of like, hey, does this make sense or not? Like, I think about George Lucas a lot. No, I'm not even joking. Like
No, I think you're so right. So George Lucas, in creating the Star Wars prequel trilogy, is creating something that is wholly focused. And I think that that's something that Sam Levinson too, really, his interest set is so on display, both in The Idol and in The Idol season 2, aka Euphoria season 3, aka No Country for Young Hoes.
I was gonna say it was Alamo as the spinoff to Fargo, but like a much lesser version of Fargo.
You think Alamo is the spinoff to Fargo? So Alamo Brown, for reference, he is played by an actor that I don't think I'll be able to pronounce his name off the top of my head. Adwale, Akinwumi, Ajab.
Oh, you did pretty
Tough.
good. You did pretty good. Like I just know him as Adwale.
Adwale,
Yeah.
okay. So we'll call him that. Unfortunately, we aren't able to use his surname, respect to this generations-long actor. He began on Lost many, many years ago and is now older and just as incredible an actor. And he is playing a character that many critics have some disdain for because they say it reminds them of a Tarantino character. I'm probably thinking specifically Jules from, not to be confused from Jules from Euphoria, but Jules played by Sam Jackson from Pulp Fiction. You see a lot of that, right?
Maybe. I don't know. I feel like Alamo is just a stock character that you can find in any sort of like Western. It's like a mix between Western and then you have like the crime shows. So I think of like True Detective.
And like blaxploitation,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Because just this is worth saying, the character played by Adwale is largely in vein with these like pimps of the 70s and 80s, these very big personalities. He speaks in that certain way. He has a, style to him. He's dressed like a cowboy, and he is the quote unquote savior to Rue in this season. So obviously Euphoria's come a long way since its high school beginnings.
Yeah.
And in this season, she is under the thumb of the character Lori, which we covered in some capacity in our very, 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 very first episode, when we actually did talk about Euphoria season 2. And so we talked more broadly about the show as a whole and all of these characters that have since gone by the wayside, whether it's Kat, whether it's her sister Gia, neither of which appear in this season, whether it's Elliot, who is cut from this third season, or whether it's Fezco, who actually passed away and plays an important part in this show as a ghost, just because, of course, this actor, Angus Cloud, had a very close relationship with Sam Levinson and continues to have a close relationship with Rue in season 3. But all that being said, so we're talking specifically about Alamo, and Alamo is a character. And so Alamo's characterization is a unique one to Euphoria because he's entirely a new season 3 character and he plays a huge role in the show as a whole. He connects with other characters from the show's past, the most prominent one being Maddie Perez, Alexa Demi's character, who played a huge role in the previous 2 seasons as kind of the quote unquote mean girl, although I think she does a very good job in elevating that character. Alamo is ultimately fast talking or slow talking in the case of this particular guy, pimp. So that's kind of unique to this show, right? I mean, we didn't really see this kind of character in previous seasons.
Well, because and maybe we have glossed over it. Yes, we have done this. We have already covered Euphoria before. This was our first ever episode we've done. You should check it out. I mean, it's a little rough around the edges. It was like our first episode.
I'm gonna have to repost it on some of these platforms.
Well, repost it away. But that's the thing. Like, I think part of what inspired us to do this was Euphoria. So it is like interesting that it's become full circle and we've sort of glossed over it, so I don't appreciate that, Jordan. But I think what's really interesting is that this show has become really divisive. It's always been a little divisive. It's always been sort of like one of those last water cooler shows out there where, and what I mean by water cooler show is when you go to work and then you had watched the episode and then during like lunch break, you talk about the episodes with your coworkers, being like, "Oh, did you catch the episode last night? It was crazy." You know, and Euphoria, Game of Thrones, Severance has done that. Succession has done that to a lesser degree. Like these really tentpole, like conversational pieces that have really affected our zeitgeist. But I think what's really interesting is that Euphoria in the first 2 seasons, it was hyper focused, it was hyper stylized, it was hyper, not just stylized in terms of like visuals, but also music, right? It was very much like, this is about drugs, this is about teenagers, this is about sex, this is about everything having to do with the extremities of teenage life. And then the big ask was this show jumps a few years, which makes sense. The characters aged up because the actors have aged up. But at the same time, what happens is Euphoria was on its own a very, very clear show with a very, very clear vision that was very, very much like secure in its own sort of ecosystem. And then it had to branch out for various real world reasons because the actors have become super, super famous. Zendaya, Sydney Sweeney, Jacob Elordi, and Coleman Domingo. They've become like superstars, Emmy winners, Oscar winners, box office superstars. Arguably, the reason why we're doing like an episode on Zendaya is because I believe she's like one of the few, if not the only true movie star of our generation, of being like someone like an actual young person, because she has literally 5 massive conversational projects coming out this year.
And I think we proved that in the second half of this episode.
Yeah. Like I remember messaging you when we saw like the first episode when it came out of season 3, being like, I don't like the tone shift. This has become like a crime show akin to True Detective, akin to Fargo. And I was so frustrated because I was just kind of like, okay, this is a fine show. I can still appreciate it for what it is, but this is not Euphoria. And I feel like that's just been the general consensus that it's not, because also the characters are not really themselves anymore, because they can't be, because you can't really focus on any of them, because Jacob Elordi literally can only appear by himself when he's only been, allowed to shoot for 1 week because he's so busy. There have been so many scenes this season with Nate, which is crazy because he was like the main villain of the first 2 seasons. And he's regulated into the background, and his like...
Well, he's siloed into his own B-plot.
Yeah, and a B-plot that doesn't really... It lives almost like in its own show, right?
Absolutely.
Because he's almost not in front of any of the other actors except for Sydney Sweeney. And even then, that's only for like half of it. And the other half of it, he's like stomping flowers alone in a desert. Or he's talking to like a court... again, by himself being like the only major character there. There's so many times where like he is so removed, and so is Hunter Schafer. Hunter Schafer has been reduced to an almost Rapunzel like role, and I'm not even joking. This is what it's been called even by the creative team.
That's actually a Great name, too.
Yeah.
So when you have the character Rue appearing in Jules's world, now here's where I make my stance, is that I think that Jules earns her space in the show because Rue is the centrifuge. And Rue and Jules have unfinished business. And I think that this show, in all of its odd idiosyncrasies, of which there are many, and I think I have a lot of space emotionally for a lot of them, and certain choices, as with all of Sam Levinson's work broadly, can be scrutinized because there's a lot of different ideas. He's not really the typical Hollywood type. Some people are going so far as to say that the final shot of the show with the American flag is MAGA. I think there's a lot of broadly tonal stuff to suggest that might be the case. Jules, as a character, is a sugar baby.
Mhm.
Nate is relegated to being kind of a sucker. Cassie is an OnlyFans model. Maddie is a pimp
Yeah.
in many ways. And the only character that really, there are two main characters that don't fall into this. And you could classify the Sam Levinson mindset in this new season is something like a trifecta. You either have the pimp, the prostitute, or the saint. And these characters can shift in dynamics, right? You can become a saint from a pimp. You can become, which kind of happens in the show. You could just sort of become nothing. You can be lower than any of these people and you can have no space in society. I think that's the case of Elordi, where he loses all autonomy. But then anyone who is, and in that way, I guess he becomes, in a way, a prostitute because he has no agency. So he is an object that people are placing their whatever on. And then the saint can transcend above this kind of grimy world that Levinson has set. But it is kind of a didactic world. And it means that a lot of these characters lose a lot of their core shape. And Jules, certainly, in this season and the past, people have criticized her actions at length. I think that that was one of the most contentious things when we were talking about Euphoria Season 2. And I actually had a lot of space for Jules as a character in Euphoria Season 2. But nonetheless, her character has lost a lot of what made her vital in Season 1. She had a lot more agency in Season 1. In terms of Rue as she interacts with Jules, though, I think that Jules and her as a relationship continues to follow a similar track. And it's one of the few things in the show that I think you can really point to as a through line seasons 1 all the way through 3. I mean, one of the best moments is when Jules and Nate get to have a conversation in episode 3, which is the Nate and Cassie wedding, which is interesting in the fact that Rue almost plays no role in that episode as a true character because she's off doing stuff for Alamo Brown. So she doesn't really get a chance to interact with Jules and Nate and gets to make herself known in this world. She is siloed. And you spoke very well to that. The reason why all these characters are siloed is because we've taken just way too long between seasons. This kind of stuff is mitigated largely when you do have a consistent schedule. You look at a show like The Bear, which has its share of criticisms too, and it's a show I think I have a lot more time for specifically because all of these characters are living in the same world. Now, sure, they have their siloed moments, but broadly, this is a show that works with its characters, not works against them. And I do think that Levinson just has his work cut out for him in this season. I have respect for that. In terms of the broader worldview, I don't know if I necessarily agree with all of his thoughts, but I will say that he does continue to shine his light brightest on Zendaya as a character. And I think that I can respect the way that he has been managing her as a performer throughout this 3-season arc. And I think that the way that it ends with her character is so wonderful and magnanimous and perfect that I think that it speaks not only to Rue as a character, but Zendaya as a character and as she continues to be in different pursuits. And her role will shift slightly, but you do see the same sort of quiet, introspective, charming, a little sarcastic. It's this unique brand of Zendayaism that's definitely present in the drama and that is hugely present in the Spider-Man movies.
Yeah, there's something about her Before I get to that, though, it is interesting that you were like, "Oh, it was perfect. It was beautiful." That ending is still one of the most divisive things I've ever seen, especially coming out of this year.
I see.
To be honest, like there are parts of me that like respected it because, ironically, the Israeli version of Euphoria ended this in a similar way, where the protagonist
Yeah.
is dead, and it makes sense. And Levinson was inspired by Angus St. Cloud, like his death, because he unfortunately passed away from fentanyl between season 2 and season 3. And originally, Levinson admitted that he had a different ending for Rue. But as soon as that happened, as soon as St. Cloud died, then he was like, no, this is the realism of this is that, this is what happens. So, I commend him for treating it with the reality of the situation because the fentanyl crisis has become and has been really dangerous, especially for young people. I think it's like the leading cause of death for people under 50 in the United States.
Well, and you were talking about how Sam Levinson just brings full Levinson to everything he does. And this is an important thing that informs almost every choice in this season into making it fully now a crime drama Western, which is the fentanyl thing. Fentanyl is so important in the DNA of every single choice that's made throughout this season.
Yeah. And I'm sorry for saying Saint. His name is Angus Cloud. I think I was just kind of like thinking about Saint elsewhere currently.
Sure.
But yeah, Angus Cloud, who is very much like in spirit still alive this season because his character is still alive. And I think one of the...
Well, they keep him alive. And that was prior to his death.
Yes.
That was something that was baked in from the beginning, that the writer and the actor who had a very close connection, Sam Levinson, having been a former addict, wanted Angus Cloud to have something to live for.
Mhm.
And so he keeps that spirit alive, and he keeps Angus alive in the show as his character and continues to. But I also think that they do, I personally think something very tasteful, which is in the final episode, he is of course in jail for most of this season because of the events that occur at the end of season 2, which we don't have to litigate because we have a whole episode on it.
Absolutely.
The character escapes, and Rue in Revelation goes to meet him, and in many ways spiritually does, because that's the moment when the character of Rue herself gets the same fate that Angus did, which is an overdose on fentanyl.
Yeah. Like there are so many pieces here that could work, right? Like you could see sort of the through line of what they were going for with the end. It's just muddled down by so much around it, right? Like I feel like Rue, and even you talked about like, oh, how Levinson was actually really thoughtful towards like Rue's character. It makes sense. Again, there's been many critical like analysis that Rue's just like a self-insert character for Levinson. So it's obvious that realistically, one could argue he puts a lot of emotional and critical energy when he sets an entire story around her. But it's also important to recognize that Zendaya has been often cited to be the Atlas holding the world of Euphoria up. I mean, as soon as she died, the show was done.
Why they ended the show 45 minutes in to an hour and a half long episode, we'll never know.
Yeah, but even as they were like gearing up for the final episode of the season, they said season finale, not series finale, right? And a big portion of it was to put people in like the suspense, but it was sort of like a reality of, hey, without Zendaya, there is no Euphoria. And that is true. That has never been more true than this season, right? Because like say what you will about season 3 of Euphoria, but Zendaya is the massive, not only standout, she's the emotional backbone of all of it. Whenever she appears on screen, you actually feel something. And it's because of how good she is as an actress. Like I've seen so many posts on Instagram, on Facebook, so many clips on YouTube, just showing like images and clips of her like playing a drug addict and playing it so truthfully, so emotionally, so powerfully. And also just like seeing her being like awkward and also kind of like wanting to do good. My sister said that to me yesterday. She watched the entire season and she was like, Rue is one of the most interesting characters I've seen because she clearly wants to do good. She clearly tries to do good. it just never works out for her.
Well, she continues to strive for sainthood,
Yeah.
something that Ali, the character played by Coleman Domingo, Ali is the saint throughout the entirety of the series. It's only, of course, in season 3 when we begin this very didactic approach to character, and many of these adults are now falling into disreputable job positions. The thing that, which we haven't really said, is that most of the season, Zendaya's main job is as the second-hand man, right-hand man to a pimp, right? So she is working at a strip club, acting as the manager at this locale and probably doing some nefarious things on the side that we don't even have time to see.
Yeah.
But she's hauling drugs, she's hauling women, she is really acting as a character we would never want her to see, but because of this emotional centrifuge that she holds, she holds not only a show together, but she allows us to continually respect and adore her character, even through these choices. But it's also in part because Sam Levinson continues to invoke the Bible again and again and again throughout the show. There are a ton of biblical references, many of them more confusing than not. It's hard to really say by the end of the season whether Sam Levinson believes in God, whether he believes in the tool of God. Of course, he's not a Christian, but he, I believe, does, I think, have some kind of relationship with Christianity or spirituality broadly.
There's always been that theme. And again, so much of it had to do with the music, and we would be remiss not to mention the fact that one of the biggest shifts that happened was that in the first 2 seasons, the musical artist Labyrinth worked and created the music, and then he had a massive falling out with HBO and Sam Levinson. Even publicly talked about it, I think a week or 2 weeks before the show aired.
I have some notes on that. The quirky soundtrack that made the show so iconic was replaced by the biggest sound designer and composer in Hollywood right now, Hans Zimmer. And it was because Labyrinth and Levinson had, I would say, loose disagreements. It's not necessarily that they had a falling out the way that it happened on, say, The White Lotus, where the composer actually kind of rage quit because he didn't like the main guy. Labyrinth and Levinson very openly do adore each other as people. It's just that Labyrinth, the artist, couldn't manage to be in this new version of Euphoria, which speaks again to the fact that this went from being just another HBO show to being one of the biggest shows, not only in America, but in international waters. But yeah, I don't know if I necessarily loved the Hans Zimmer soundtrack. I felt like it was a deficit for the show at large. It feels kind of generic. I mean, it's no secret that Zimmer does represent the establishment in Hollywood, and so certain riffs on the soundtrack almost sound like he's back in Dune mode. Speaking of Zendaya.
There's not much I could say about this. It's been a wild ride with Euphoria. I mean,
it really has been.
It's probably going to be the most polarizing thing that is going to come out this year because it was so wildly hyped. And
well, polarizing is unique, right? So there is some merit to this show in a way that maybe didn't exist in previous seasons. I do think that there is something about seeing this show as its own unique unit apart from Euphoria as a grander project. It is obviously continuation of the character of Rue, but it is very different from season 2 of Euphoria, and it almost doesn't even really factor in. Do you think you could rewatch this show with season 3 as the end point?
Probably not. I actually remember telling you when we covered season 2 that I'd be okay if this was the end.
Yeah.
I would be totally okay if this was the end. And I would now wish it was. I feel like I didn't need to watch this season. Other than Rue's demise, I don't think it added much to anything. I actually think it betrayed most of the characters. And even though they were heavily involved, there has been many sort of insider information over the fact that Sydney Sweeney got to essentially dictate what she wanted to do. And Levinson essentially catered to what she wanted. Of course, he wanted to make Cassie into an OnlyFans model, but like it was Sydney Sweeney who wanted to really push it because she was like, look, if we're going to do it, let's really do it. And then you have like these images as Casszilla, or which is, of course, based on both Godzilla and the 50-foot woman. Again, I can appreciate the artsiness of it because Euphoria has always been like an artsy show. But I remember how artsy it was, how brave it was with the visuals, and how ultra specific it was in season 1 and season 2. That I think with season 3, it just became a little bit more generic, and it just lost its tone and its atmosphere and its mood and its everything. It just became something Western. Like, that's the best way I can describe it. It became really like generic HBO show. And a lot of that has to do with sort of Deadwood and True Detective and all that other stuff. Even, Sopranos. It's just dark and broody. And Euphoria was not that. It was something a bit different.
Yeah.
It was like trippy. And it's now that's gone. And I think what's the real shame here is that the characters were messy, not because they were saints, prostitutes, or pimps, but because they were teenagers still figuring out the world. And that's what made them so both revolting, compelling, and tragic. Here they're adults, they're like young adults, and they're a bit more mature, and yet they're not. There's something to be said about the fact that almost all the women have been reduced to literal, like, as you said, like pimps, prostitutes, and drug mules. And I think that it has to be said that even Hunter Schafer's character of Jules, which was so integral, I mean, she was the reason this show really existed. She was the main conflict, along with Nate and Rue, that triangle. That triangle doesn't exist anymore. And I remember watching it and being like, this is the reason why Euphoria doesn't feel like Euphoria anymore. Because this is how we started and this is how it's ended. Something so far removed from the original vision for what it was that I'm just kind of like, okay, then why are we here? And I'm like, oh, of course, I know why I'm here. And her name is Zendaya.
I have 2 final notes on that. Firstly, that this show began under the influence of Petra Collins, who does very much represent. She was a photographer, and this was going to be her big break. And then Levinson ended up getting cold feet, and he severed his connection with Collins before season 1 debuted. But it was the idea of Euphoria as a remake was really contingent on the aesthetics of Petra Collins at that time. By the time that season 2 came out, this show had shifted dramatically, and Levinson had began to work with an outdated film stock that gave it this really green, yellow color palette. So it completely changed the mood and tone and kind of felt like you were still at a party after it was already supposed to have ended. And I have no qualms in saying that that is still my favorite season of Euphoria. A lot of my friends already were off the Sam Levinson boat at that point. And that was, I think, largely due to the fact that he did have this big slip up with Malcolm and Marie, which was not very well regarded at the time. And there were starting to be people who just didn't agree with the fact that Levinson had a platform. They just felt like maybe he had a little bit too much ego. And maybe he does. That is totally a fair criticism to a point, because this guy has so much specificity in the way he views the world, and it can be a really dark place in his mind. And not a place that I think a lot of people want to spend a ton of time in. When you finally get into season 3, now all of a sudden, Ted Lasso has not only said we are ending our show, but Ted Lasso has already filmed another season of the show, all in the time that Euphoria had to go from the end of season 2 into season 3. And now he's still filming on a lot of really cool film stocks. Now he's doing a lot of really cool things, but it's at the expense of character. And that is ultimately what will leave this show in, I think, more dire straits. So, bringing to my second point, what could this have looked like? I think that this show could still work in a soft reboot fashion if you brought someone like Petra Collins back into the fold. I think that it was a big mistake removing female voices from the show The Idol. That show did not end up succeeding in many ways, although it did have a lot of viewership. That's something that Sam Levinson continues to achieve, is even though he is very controversial, he is controversial in a way that continues to get eyeballs. So I do believe that this isn't truly the end of Euphoria as a property on HBO. I think they're going to have to take a lot of time to cool off, but I think it's wise for them to continue to look at this as something that could be a revenue driver for the platform at large. This is something that's huge. And the Hollywood world right now is IP. I mean, just this week as we're recording this episode, Super Mario Galaxy, the movie, has reached $1 billion. So it makes sense that they're not going to end off Euphoria. But I think that if you wanted to do shows involving these characters, you could have done what they did with between seasons 1 and 2 and make little tiny micro episodes, make movies out of this. It seems like Levinson wanted to make a movie. I don't know why he felt so tied into making this a episodic series the way that season 2 was, because it's obvious that that's not the structure that this made sense for anymore. If he had made an entire movie of the Cassie and Nate Jacobs plot, that would have worked. If he had made an entire movie that was just Zendaya and Alamo and her in that sphere, that would have worked. If he had made a much more traditional television style format where all of these actors somehow were able to be in the same room together for 60 to 90 days and they could have actually made a proper season of TV, that would have worked. Instead, I think that this is a mixture of some of those ideas and some of those impulses, plus you're adding the entire layer on top of that of the pimp, prostitute, and saint dynamic. And I think what that ends up being is something that I agree with you, Niv, just doesn't hit that same level of rewatchability. But as you've also said, that is not at the expense of the character that we were always riding for and the actress that we're riding for continually, who is Zendaya. And so I think that as we're moving into our second half, it's a great opportunity to be able to discuss her beginnings and where I think we're going next.
Totally.
So we're going to take a quick break, listen to some music. I'm going to grab a drink of water, and then we are going to be talking about A24's The Drama. Stay tuned. Hi there, listener. I know you are not hearing music right now. That's because we actually do a legal form of music streaming that you can find exclusively on our homepage, which is Mixcloud. So if you are interested in listening to a playlist that I personally curate for every single episode, then I would highly recommend you take a trip to Mixcloud and finish the episode starting exactly here where you left off and listen to that playlist and then dive into the second half. That said, if you choose not to do so, here's the second half right now. And we're back. So, in the same corridor as A24 put out its hit movie, Materialists, last year, they have returned with another offbeat rom-com. This one with a little bit more legs than the previous. This one is called The Drama, starring Zendaya, of course, and alongside her love interest, Rob Pattinson, who is a museum director, a neurotic, stammering man who has an initial charming persona that does lead to something a bit darker. Emma, on the other hand, is a workaday white-collar professional with a kind of warm and openness that has become so emblematic of Zendaya as a performer as a whole. This is about a happily engaged couple put to the test when an unexpected turn sends their wedding week off the rails. Directed by Christopher Borgli, this is his, I believe, third English language feature of note. I have watched the most recent two. The first of his A24 collaborations was called Dream Scenario, starring Nicolas Cage. That one I wrote about a little bit at the time. That may be available somewhere on the internet. But I did really like Borgli's work there, and here he continues to bring the social drama aspect alongside a terrific performance once again from Zendaya. So more broadly, Niv, what did you think about The Drama?
I thought it was good. I feel like it was good for what it was. I enjoyed what it was trying to do. I enjoyed the performances, but I wasn't blown away. And a big portion of why I enjoyed it was because of Zendaya and Robert Pattinson. I feel like their chemistry did it for me. And I think their performances carried a lot of weight, but I just felt that for what it actually was, it was honestly good to fine, fine to good, versus like wow, amazing and great. Because I had watched it alongside. I didn't do a double feature, but I watched one day Project Hail Mary, and then the next day I watched a drama. So
Two very different films.
two very different films, but I found one really like, wow, this is really smart. This is really cool. This is really great. I'm enjoying every minute of it. And the other one, which was the drama, I was just kind of like, oh, okay, I'm enjoying some of it. I think this is fine. And the reason I mostly felt that way is because I felt like it, for the subject matter that it tried to cover, it didn't really do much with it, obviously. And that was sort of the point, right? Because as we will talk about very briefly, like the reason why their impending marriage goes into like this massive dramatic tailspin or the drama is because new information comes to light that colors Zendaya's character in a very different light, in a very negative light. And she's being heavily, 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 heavily judged on it by everyone around her. And what's crazy is that even though this is negative information, she didn't do anything. Like, I think that so much of this impetus of what happens is that, early on in the film, the four major characters play this game where they ask each other, okay, what is the worst thing you've ever done? And two of them actually say the worst thing they've ever done. But, Zendaya's like character Emma is like, well, I almost did this, but I didn't actually do it. I planned this. And I was talking to one of my best friends yesterday about the drama, and he brought up like a really interesting point where he was like, it's about so much about this movie is about community. If the community is awful to you, then it's about how nurture can cause you to do terrible things. But if the community is positive towards you, then you're able to bring something back to it, something positive. And Zendaya's character does both really well as we dive into her backstory. And even today, like I was talking to my therapist, and I'm closing this out, I'll get to it. But she talked to me about like the whole verbiage of it takes a village to raise like a child. And the reason, and she talked to me about the etymology of where that phrase comes from. It comes from the idea that if the village raises the child correctly, they will be able to actually bring back something positive to the village. They'll help to make it grow. But if the village does something terrible to the said child and they grow up negatively, then they have the potential to destroy said village. And I had never really heard that before. But obviously, when you're connecting it to the major sort of conflict that happens in this film, I was like, no, that makes so much sense. And it very much is entirely that. And that theoretical thing was what I really enjoyed about it. But at the same time, everything around it is still like a comedy.
Yeah. Wow. A lot of threads here. So, firstly, to talk about what you were, I'm going to go back to the beginning of this huge legacy of the not only like cinema, but the world that you're talking about here. So, obviously, Project Hail Mary and the drama, both huge successes in very different corners of the world and of culture. Now, I think one thing of note here is that Project Hail Mary is sort of contingent on the fact that Ryan Gosling can have chemistry with The Rock, which that's pretty massive. That's pretty cool. And I'm not talking about Dwayne, by the way, when I say The Rock. I'm talking about a rock creature. The drama, on the other hand, is contingent on two pretty well-established stars with Pattinson and Zendaya. Now, Robert Pattinson, as an actor, he's gone all the way back through many, many years. He is, I think, a little older than Zendaya. He's in his
Of course, he is, yeah.
40s. Zendaya, she's married to young Tom Holland.
We don't know that. We don't know that. We don't know if she is married or not.
We don't know, but her longtime collaborator and stylist made reference to the fact that he was at a wedding that she was the bride in. So I think it's safe to say that she and Spider-Man are married. But, to each their own.
We'll cover him next episode.
Hey, if I ever see any wedding pictures, I can really come down hard on that. But it seems to me that most of these celebrities, including Miss Taylor Swift, are going no phones. So we may never know. In any case, the fictional husband of Zendaya and Zendaya are similar in many ways. So Pattinson obviously got his start in Twilight
Harry Potter.
nearly 2 decades ago.
You got to
Well,
study Harry Potter.
he was a single character who, spoiler alert, dies in Harry Potter. And in the Twilight Saga, he is immortal. And that made him
Well, it's like everybody talks about Robert Pattinson's like performance in Goblet of Fire, so we would be remiss not to mention that. Like, I get it.
remiss.
Yeah, we would be remiss not to mention it. Why?
How do
Why
you
are
feel
you?
about J.K. Rowling, Niv?
I mean,
Positive, negative, mixed?
I know I feel pretty positively about Robert Pattinson, and that includes his entire library of films, including the Twilight Saga.
Anyway, so there was this little fantasy film that he was in. It was called Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire in 2005.
Mhm.
And, it made a little bit of money. And then he became a vampire and he was in some of the greatest cinema ever put to screen. And that was called The Twilight Saga. So, moving from that, he's worked with many great directors. He was in The Lighthouse. He's worked with Claire Denis. He's worked with the Safdie brothers. He's worked with James Gray. He's already done one film with Nolan. By the end of this year, he and Zendaya are going to work together twice more in The Odyssey and in Dune Part 3. So they're going to have a lot of good time together. And luckily, it seems like they have a lot of fun together. I wanted to say this because he was, of course, like a teen heartthrob in many ways. And he has a long history in films that, that I kind of made it sarcastically reference the fact that these are kind of big budget and largely for the masses, right? They are broad. Maybe you wouldn't have expected Pattinson in 2010 to ever achieve the kind of filmic respect that he's had in recent years. Obviously, he's made a pretty big pivot. I think that pivot was largely due to his relationships with Nolan and then most directly Matt Reeves when he played Batman and the Batman, which we also did an episode on. Second episode of Zeitgeist was about the Batman. And that was a film I was mixed on, but I think is broadly considered to be a huge success in the broader DC universe. Zendaya, on the other hand, she started as a Disney gal. She worked her way from the show Shake It Up into the silver screen with Spider-Man. That was her first big break there. And then Euphoria, obviously, was kind of the moment when we realized that this gal is someone we should be taken really seriously. And over the years, it just seems like she continues to hold her ground. It's fascinating how many Zendaya performances I've seen in a career that I think is pretty well charted and telegraphed, I would say. Very well telegraphed. She knows where to put her stock. She knows which directors will manage this really unique perspective she has on cinema. And I think no better than the drama. I think the drama in many ways gives her this similarly almost reserved quality. Now, granted, she has this really magnificent, she's beautiful. She has a star about her, but she also plays kind of understated characters, and none more than Emma here. I think of Challengers 2 years ago. Similarly, a character with a level of understated quality, but just a magnificent gravitas. And Emma as a character doesn't work if she's not played by Zendaya, I don't think. The drama is largely, I think, successful because of Zendaya's quality that she brings to it. And these two actors are just so spectacular. Not to say that the other two characters you just mentioned. So there's this big moment. Everybody's telling their secrets. There's Alana Haim, who many have considered to be the true villain of the drama. And then Mamadou Attache, and he is an actor I've seen in other work before and lesser in terms of my knowledge, but a really none lesser in terms of his performance. Absolutely plays with the big leagues. Alana Haim, of course, best known for her work as a musician, but has made flashes working with Paul Thomas Anderson in recent years. So those are the kind of the main four actors of note. But of course, our, I think, main focus here is on Zendaya and most importantly, what she has done in her past. Do you want to unravel that spoiler for us?
She planned the school shooting.
Which you seem to be a little bit more relaxed on than I am.
Yeah, of course, because I'm not American. So there you go.
I guess. I guess.
When you live in
And
that
most
constant
importantly,
fear,
you mentioned so she doesn't do the shooting. She
doesn't.
doesn't shoot anybody.
She doesn't.
And it's because that she feels ostracized, which you mentioned, the world has abandoned her in many ways. But the reason why she doesn't commit the school shooting is not because of the change of heart, which does happen later. But the reason why she initially doesn't complete the school shooting is because there had already been another one the same day. Now, this is where I think me and Borgley have the same sense of humor, because that is both funny, dark, and so disturbing. And I think Borgley manages to thread that needle perfectly, both in Dream Scenario and here. Zendaya as an actor, in the way that we are reading the story, it's interesting because she both has enormous shame here, and yet it almost feels like, for me, when I watched the movie initially, I was almost always kind of waiting for her to make the move. Like, I almost expected this to be the moment where we get to see a true side of Emma that otherwise would not have been uncapped.
What?
Now, we don't ever really get there.
Yeah.
Well, she was going to kill people. Do you think that she does not have that capacity?
No, because I think that was sort of the, maybe this is going to be more interesting than the movie for me, this conversation.
I agree.
Not
just to say that this is a movie. I love the movie, but this is a movie that is about conversation. The next episode that we're going to cover, I think, is similarly made lots of money. Is made for conversation to happen. We are talking about this movie, and that makes the movie worth talking about.
But I think for me, it was very much telegraphed that so much about the film is about these people having the wrong impression and almost having like an unforgiving response to it because they did, right? They all need.
All right, that's me then.
Well, it is, and I think that you should calm yourself, Alana Haim.
Wow.
Yeah, but I think that was the joke here, and it is interesting because ultimately, like a non-American wrote this film and directed this film, and I think for me, it very much showcased sort of this idea of how Robert Pattinson's character needed a reason. He needed like an origin story for her. And I joked with my friend yesterday of like being like it needed to be like akin to like Bruce Wayne's origin story. What was it, like the alley? His mother dies. She was clutching her pearls. It's the same kind of thing. For him to become Batman, for her to become like a school shooter or want to be, because she's like, oh, you had like a friend die, right? And she's like, yeah. And he was like, how close was this friend? She was not really. It didn't really affect me in the way that you're hoping. And even then, that's crazy. And she's right, because it is. And that's what I was talking about, like this whole idea of community and nature versus nurture. I think they're assuming that it's her nature, but really it was the nurture. And what they're doing is perpetrating that nurture, right? Because the actual thing that made her not do it was not necessarily that there was another school shooting. It did change her mind, but she could have still done it. The thing that made her not do it is that she found community in people that wanted to stand against school shootings, like teens that were very much like affected by this. And she was like, okay, I wanted to do this, but really I can see now that isn't the way, because really what I needed was actual positive reinforcement by the people around me.
Yeah.
And just to close this note out, in like present day, Zendaya's character of Emma is still the strongest person in the room, because she actually learn from her past experiences. That's why I never thought for a second she would show a true side, because she was consistently showing her true side every time someone was like talking to her, because she was like, I'm not that person anymore. I was, but I'm not. So stop judging me, please.
Fair enough. The movie definitely leaves a little bit of openness in many ways. And if there's one critique to be made of the film as a whole, is that it does have a pretty tight focus, and the focus is largely on these two characters. When you're talking about the idea of school shootings more broadly, this is a huge, cannot understate, button topic right now in America. And that is the place where I am currently living. And so obviously that's going to taint my sensibility somewhat, and I can absolutely acknowledge that, to be clear. But that being said, when you're talking about this kind of huge issue, there are, I think, certain expectations. And whether the movie holds to those expectations is absolutely an open question. Now, when I'm looking at the drama, I'm going to look at the drama on its own terms and relative to what I believe to be Borgely's strong suits, and whether I believe those strong suits to follow my sensibilities and my taste. From Dream Scenario, he has established an interest in things like cancel culture, which is really what Dream Scenario is all about. In this movie, it's not unlike that in many ways, and about perception and about what makes a person bad in the eyes of not just a individual, but a community. And certainly certainly having the intention to kill others is going to dismiss you broadly in a area where you were supposed to be reputable. It is going to shine you in an unfashionable light. Now, that is undeniable. While the film is provocative, it also limits the sprawl of how far the conversation goes. It's going to be asking questions without providing clear answers. Now, that means that the character of Emma is not always going to be the good guy, right? One particular moment is while she is kind of unraveling, while both of these characters are unraveling due to this drama, due to this huge tumult in their relationship, she ends up kind of snapping at a DJ that she personally has been very permissive of due to the fact that, she's had her tough moments, right? The DJ in question was doing hard drugs, and they actually saw this girl with their own eyes doing hard drugs. The question is, does that mean that someone who is potentially a drug addict should not be the DJ at their wedding? Now, again, that's an open question. Does the drug use mean that she's no longer trustworthy? This is an open question. Is Zendaya's past experience mean that she is not a trustworthy partner? I believe an open question as well. And the character of Emma herself comes down on the side of no. It's an open question on why she is so upset at the DJ. And I want to throw this back to you, Niv, because I think that this is a particular moment in the movie where we see that the character has potential to conduct herself in the same way that characters like Alana Haim have in the past, which is with judgment. And it's worth noting that the character of Emma is judgmental, and it's in certain capacities, but nonetheless, there's judgment there as well. Now, just because this is kind of part of your main argument, I want to be able to bring that into the fold as well.
That gives me like a really easy way out. She's a bride on the day of her wedding day. Like, you realize that has historically been like the craziest a person can be in like pop culture. And it's
well,
true.
Not the craziest. She manages to do the whole day without killing a single person. So I would argue that that's not the craziest she's ever been.
Again, but the point is that like that is her version of crazy, like that she's capable of being judgmental. And a lot of that has to do with spending literally the past couple of days being judged against. There's a lot of like arguments you can make here for her tripping. Let's call it tripping. Because
sure.
Obviously, like, it's her wedding day. She's struggling with her husband, who's been very much hounding her. She's been struggling with her friends. Like, the person who was meant to be her maid of honor was like, I'm not coming. I'm not doing this.
Right. That's going to be the Alana Haim character.
Yeah.
What was that woman's name?
Rachel. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Like, there were a lot of things already going wrong. But ultimately, I was explaining it to another one of my friends like the other day. Films do that. Films manipulate you, the audience, right? Especially when you watch it from a certain perspective. Because the main character of this movie is not Emma. It's not Zendaya's character. It's Robert Pattinson's character. Everything we see is from his perspective, right? So it's really easy to judge everything that Emma does because Charlie, the character Robert Pattinson is playing, is already judging her. He also imagines her. He has like this nightmare where she kills everyone at the wedding. So it also makes sense that, like when he does something terrible, which he does, he objectively does an action
Oh, absolutely.
that is not good.
I mean, he commits many, many foibles.
Yeah.
In the process of the movie, we end with a very, very different version of this character than he began because he continues to trip over himself in effort to more or less make peace with this new version of his bride.
Yeah.
And does obviously some heinous things. Whether those things are totally unforgivable, again, an open question.
Yeah, because again, in your mind, it's like, is it as bad as a school shooting? But again, I don't feel like that's the litmus test here. I think, again, what people misjudge about this, and I think it does, this really makes this work because I feel like it was hyper focused on like an American reaction because this is an American thing. It's unfortunately, painfully, tragically, culturally an American thing. And when you point it out that way, it makes sense why you're just so judgmental against it because it's seeped into your culture. It's seeped into your day to day. It's seeped into your news cycle. But really, what it is, it's about a character thinking, when you really boil it down to the facts, it's about a character thinking of doing something heinous, but not doing it, not following through, planning it, almost doing it, preparing for it, but ultimately not actually doing it. And especially going through that as someone who was ultimately a teenager. There's so many elements there that make sense why you would not actually judge her. But the reason you do is because this is one of the most reoccurring heinous things that happens in America, not only on like a monthly basis, but almost like on a statistically weekly basis. And that's the thing. It makes sense why there was such like a crazy reaction to this movie. Even I think the way the movie sort of marketed itself was not very nice, right? Because obviously it was talking about this big drama, and it did turn out to be like this character wanted to do school shooting. And obviously a bunch of people, especially from March for Our Lives, an association led by survivors of the Parkland High School shooting, they criticized it, and rightfully so. Rightfully so, because they're just kind of like, you can't do that. You can't sort of monetize this sort of thing as if it's nothing. You should have actually put it front and center. And they're right to say that. But at the same time, I stand by what I'm saying, that ultimately a lot of that rage and vitriol that happens towards a character, this character, is unwarranted. It's unwarranted because she didn't actually do it.
Hey, and that's true. And one of the things that we see in the other stories of these characters is that they actually did do the things that were weighing so heavily on them. For each character, whether it is the groom, Charlie, who he had a issue where he cyberbullied a kid so badly that I'm sure this child is probably traumatized in some way. Apparently the kids moved school districts because Charlie was such an awful bully. Rachel and Mike both had pretty awful things. Rachel physically, put someone into an environment where he couldn't escape. Mike physically put his girlfriend into harm's way. In all of these cases, they actually committed an action that had clear and reprehensible actions or consequences.
Yeah.
In the case of Emma, ultimately, if we are to just go purely by her actions, she is the best of them because she turned around. She chose to be not a school shooter, but an advocate against school shooting. So ultimately, that makes her the best character in the movie. And it is worth noting that this does not happen without such a warm presence and a character that is played by Zendaya, who has repeatedly, as I just mentioned, played a drug addict, played a narcissist in the case of Challengers, played a woman who is always a little bit flawed, but continues to do it in a way that is just so magnificent and so magnanimous and so magnetic. And that's, I think, something to note here. So I want to talk more broadly about not just this movie, which is the fourth largest grossing at this time A24 movie worldwide. I don't think that's going to change because Backrooms, a movie that was released at the time of recording just a weekend or two ago, has already become the number one highest grossing A24 movie of all time, both in North America and worldwide. The second highest grossing, Marty Supreme, at 191 worldwide, and the drama is at number 4. So this brings me to something that commentator Matt Bellany on The Town has brought up before, which is not just IP. So IP is something that has been ravaging Hollywood. It is the thing that keeps Hollywood alive. It is maybe artistically often, I hate to make this, I'm trying to find a way to say this maybe more kindly, but in many ways it's sort of the parasite that lives on Hollywood because it's also the thing that is sapping a lot of life out of it. And I am often critical of IP. I think have been publicly critical of IP on the show, in spite of, I think, some really terrific creators that have brought life into IP, who have done maybe the impossible job in the case of One Piece, a job that I think is so oddly shaped as to be something that I could never find much joy in, but is nonetheless something that has so much incredibly hard work put into it, so much incredibly great acting within it. Something like the drama shows me a path that is, in Dune terms, we can say, the golden path. Something that both holds the line in terms of giving stars a place to shine, but it also, Euphoria and the drama are both produced by A24, a space where actors and even unknown actors can grow and develop and become household names the way that they once were. And that's the main issue. So when I say IP plus, stars don't get things greenlit really in Hollywood much anymore. Sans maybe the Jason Statham movies, like every once in a while he'll put out a movie like The Beekeeper, which manages to make enough money to justify another Jason Statham movie. But broadly, those are going to be playing in states that I'm not living in and are not really stable for Hollywood at large. And we're finding less and less and less stars as time moves on. So, Niv, I want to ask you, what do you think here makes Zendaya special? Obviously, the drama is a property that is a story written and directed by one director. It is something that has transcended in the discourse. But I don't think it's worth understating that Pattinson and Zendaya both bring this home.
Yeah, I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that she's able to play like a massive range. She's very warm. She's very bankable. And she's genuinely like a
bankable how?
Well, the fact of the matter is, like we were talking about the two types of movies she's done. She's only, in terms of like the movies that are a smaller scale, like she's done sort of just two, Challengers and the drama.
Malcolm and Marie,
but
technically counts.
Technically, but again, I feel like that's like Euphoria plus more than anything. Seriously.
Or Euphoria minus.
Yeah, or Euphoria minus. I mean, I'm looking at her filmography, which is it's not long. It's not very extensive. But then when you look at it, it has like really big films. It has Spider-Man, The Greatest Showman. It has Space Jam. It has Dune. It has the upcoming Odyssey, and it has Shrek 5, which is also upcoming. But again, a lot of it is like franchises. And that's why I say that she's bankable, because I think she's become sort of our generation's it girl in terms of like you put her in a franchise, it's instantly, it gets like $100 million more.
Well, I like the it girl thing because it girls were historically also models, and she is well known
model and singer
for her modeling career. Yes.
And somewhat her singing career too. She had her music videos and her own like songs. But yeah, she's known as like a model icon. And I was watching My Fair Lady not that long ago with my grandmother, and there was like in the first third of the movie, she couldn't recognize Audrey Hepburn. She was like adamant that the person she was watching in front of her was not Audrey Hepburn, because obviously at that time, Eliza Doolittle was still sort of like playing someone who was poor and not dressed very well and dirty. And in the second half, when you in this 3 hour movie, then she starts wearing like, the very famous clothing she wears in My Fair Lady, and she starts looking very much like Audrey Hepburn to my grandmother. And it's the same thing with Zendaya. When you see her as Rue, you're very much kind of like, oh, that's Rue. That's not Zendaya. That is Rue. And then when you watch her in something like Challengers, then you sort of are like, okay, this looks like Zendaya, but this doesn't sound like Zendaya, because this character is like cold. She's methodical. She's narcissistic. And it's because, again, she has like this impeccable range where when you look at her, she is very much into her character. And I feel like that's something rare that's happening. That's something that's pretty rare in Hollywood in general, but something that's become even rarer because of sort of the fact that George Clooney said it best, but also not entirely true. The era of the movie star is dead.
To a sense. To a sense. And this is what I talk about with IP Plus. You need something that's going to work without the movie star, something that might be attractive without the movie star, and then you can bring the star in. But what's interesting about the world of A24 is they've managed to make it happen where they don't have to use IP specifically. I mean, number 2 in this range is who I would argue to be the other major movie star and Zendaya's co-star in Dune 3, which is Timothée Chalamet.
Yeah, Timmy. Good old Timmy, who always manages to get himself in hot water somehow.
But that's also kind of part of his appeal.
Yeah, it is. It is. And he is also the other bankable star. You're right. Because he's in everything. And unlike Zendaya, he's actually been chasing like that Oscar relentlessly. I think Zendaya, when she did Euphoria, like she very much was like recognized as television royalty and was rightfully given the Emmy. But Timothée Chalamet, on the other hand, has been like hounding. He's been hounding that Oscar. He's one of the most ambitious people in the industry right now. But because of that, like he's become like this force where you think about Timothy, and a lot of people say this, like, is he a good actor or is he not? I think he is. But the reason why people judge him for it is because he's someone that is in everything. And sometimes we don't understand why he's in everything. I argue that in Marty Supreme, for instance, I know that we're now talking about Timothée Chalamet, but I think that nowhere has him being a movie star been truer than when I saw him in Marty Supreme. Because I was like, oh, for the first time, I'm not seeing Timothée Chalamet play a character. I'm just seeing the character in Timothée Chalamet's face, which has not been true to Zendaya. With Zendaya, even when she plays Michelle Jones, also known as Mary Jane Watson.
Very different character.
Very different character, but still the same thing. When you watch her do that, you're just kind of like, okay, this is Zendaya playing in a Marvel superhero movie, fine. But, like with everything else, even when it's like IP, like when you see her play Shawnee in Dune, you're like, okay, she's really Shawnee. When you see her play in the drama or Challengers or Euphoria, you're like, oh, wow, she's really these people, not even characters, these people. And I'm really fascinated to see her performance in The Odyssey, because I'm like, I know she's not going to have a big role, but I know that whatever she does, it will feel massive. It will have weight. That's the kind of actress she is.
In Los Angeles this weekend, the Odyssey tickets have officially gone on sale, even though, well, by the time this episode comes out, it'll be pretty close to Odyssey time. But right now, we're still a little bit farther back, and already all of the weekend tickets for the 70mm screenings, they're all selling out like hotcakes. This is going to be one to remember. Same with Dune 3. Dune 3, already people are really, they're getting up into it, and I'm really excited. Hopefully we can chat about Dune 3 later this year. Now, in terms of what's coming up next, you were talking about maybe seeing her get the Oscar. I mean, what I would love to see, I want to see her do a musical again. You were talking about her music career. She did
Yeah.
The Greatest Showman, which
Yep.
was a little bit before we consider her to be like a star. You could almost say it was that year that she became a movie star because it was Greatest Showman and Spider-Man, right?
Yeah. But in Spider-Man, she appeared for like 10 minutes, like the original one.
Fair enough. I haven't seen either, actually. I think I still have to watch Homecoming before our Spider-Man episode in a few months. I have to prep.
You did watch Far From Home because I made you watch
did.
it. Yeah,
I did. That was a good movie. And she was very good in it. Now, that said, moving on to our next episode of Zeitgeist, I'm very excited. I'm hoping I will have to maybe adjust this, but I am excited to say that we're planning on doing a bonus. Normally, these episodes come out once every other month. Both Niv and I are hardworking individuals outside of working on this podcast. And so we're excited to say that because of this huge wave of horror coming down the pike, that the most successful A24 movie, we're doing a lot of A24 this year. I love A24 as a studio, but good gracious, they're coming with The Backrooms. As of last weekend, has already made more money than any A24 movie in the past, and also Obsession, which is one of my favorite movies of the year. So I'm very excited to say that we're going to do our bonus coming in July. So until then, I have been Jordan Conrad.
And I've been Nivel Baz.
Wow, unbelievable. That's our show. I'll see you all on July 26th, where we'll be discussing the latest horror movies that kicked off our summer movie season, Obsession and The Backrooms. Until then, follow us on Instagram at ZeitgeistPulp and also on Blue Sky at zpod.kbv.la. Thanks to the Power Knobs for the theme music and to my co-producer, Jalin Reyes McKinley. Hope to see you then. Stay curious.